So I was making a list the other night. Nothing serious, just idly writing down the Star Wars moments I actually remember without having to think about them. The ones that live rent-free. And about halfway down the page, I noticed something a bit odd. Almost every single one of them is a moment where somebody isn't telling the truth. A father lying about being a father. An old man lying about a murder that never happened. A smuggler lying about his ship. A queen lying about being a queen. A chancellor lying to an entire galaxy for about 30 years without anyone landing a glove on him. So that's what tonight is. A long, unhurried wander through the biggest lies in Star Wars. The ones told inside the story and the ones told about the films themselves, which are frequently just as good. There's no order to it, no ranking, no big finish. We'll be here a while, so there's no need to hang on for anything. If you like this sort of thing, the subscribe button is right there. And that's the last I'll mention it. Let's start with the oldest one. Dagobah, third film. Luke has just come back from Bespin with one hand and a fairly enormous piece of new information, and he's standing in the swamp with a dead man, asking him why he lied. And the dead man says, well, what I told you was true, from a certain point of view. I love that line. I love it because it's such a transparently rubbish thing to say, and because Obi-Wan says it with the absolute serenity of a man who has had 20 years to workshop his answer and still couldn't come up with anything better than that. Luke's response is basically, from a certain point of view, repeated back at him flat, in the tone of someone who is far too tired for this. And Obi-Wan just keeps going. Your father was seduced by the dark side. He ceased to be Anakin and became Vader. And when that happened, the good man, who was your father, was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view. Which, fine, that's a real argument. It's not a good one, but it's a real one. Let's back up though, because to appreciate how bold that dodge is, you have to remember how specific the original lie was. It happens in Ben Kenobi's house, out in the Jundland wastes. Luke is sitting there, a farm kid who has never been anywhere, and Ben hands him his father's lightsaber and tells him that his father wanted him to have it when he was old enough. Then Luke asks how his father died, and Ben says a Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of his until he turned to evil, betrayed and murdered Luke's father. Betrayed and murdered. That's not a vague answer. That's not a bit of soft focus mythology to let a boy down gently. That's a specific accusation naming a specific killer delivered to the victim's son by the only living witness. And Luke carries it around for 2 entire films. It's the thing that gets him off Tatooine. It's the reason he trains. It's the reason he goes to Bespin. A huge amount of the plot of Star Wars is powered by a sentence that is, at minimum, extremely creatively worded. And then Bespin happens. I don't need to walk you through Bespin, you know Bespin, but I want to point out how carefully the scene is built to land on that one word. Because Vader doesn't lead with the reveal. He leads with the accusation. Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. And Luke, still absolutely certain, still running on Ben's version, snaps back that he was told enough, that he was told Vader killed him, and then, no, I am your father. 4 words, that's it. That's the whole thing. Which brings me to the fun bit, and it's a thing I find quietly delightful. Almost nobody quotes that line correctly. What everyone says, what gets printed on mugs and shouted at conventions and used in adverts for double glazing, is Luke, I am your father. And the name isn't in it. It has never been in it. The line has always been those 4 words. No address, no comma, no Luke. James Earl Jones was still being credited with that non-existent line in obituaries after he died in 2024, which I think he'd have found funny. He was famously modest about the whole thing anyway. He used to describe himself as basically a special effect, which is a lovely bit of understatement from a man whose voice is arguably the most recognisable in cinema. Anyway, it's a small thing, but I've always thought it belongs in a video about lying, because it's a lie nobody told on purpose. It's just a thing millions of people are collectively wrong about, passed along and reinforced until the wrong version feels more real than the right one. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what Obi-Wan was doing to Luke, only accidentally and on a much bigger scale. Now the actual question, was Obi-Wan lying? I go back and forth on this one, and I'm not sure I've landed anywhere permanent. Here's the case for the defense. Obi-Wan watched his best friend burn on a lava bank. He genuinely does seem to believe, in some functional sense, that Anakin died there, and something else walked away. That's not a lawyer's trick, that's a man who couldn't process what he saw, and filed it under bereavement because the alternative was unbearable. Grief does strange things to tenses. People will tell you their brother died years ago, when what they mean is that their brother started drinking. And there's the practical side, which is harder to be generous about. Obi-Wan is not just a grieving friend, he's the last surviving member of a plan. He's been sitting on that sand for 19 years, waiting for a boy to be old enough to be useful. And your father was murdered by an evil man is a much more motivating story to hand a teenager than your father is the evil man, and also he doesn't know you exist, and also please go and fight him. Which is where the defense starts to wobble for me, because the version Obi-Wan chose isn't just softer, it's more mobilizing. It points Luke at a target. That's not protecting someone from a painful truth. That's editing a truth into a mission briefing. Then again, and here's my actual position if you're wondering, I don't think Obi-Wan is being cynical. I think he's a man who has spent 2 decades alone in a desert with a story he told himself so he could sleep. And by the time he needs to say it out loud, it isn't a lie anymore. It's just what he believes. Those are the most durable lies going, the ones the liar has fully moved into. We all know a version of this. Families do it constantly. Somebody dies badly, and within about 18 months, the family has quietly agreed on a tidier version. And the tidier version is the one that gets told at weddings. And eventually, the tidier version is the only one anyone can actually remember. Nobody sat down and decided to lie. It just sanded itself smooth. The phrase itself has had a proper life since, by the way. From a certain point of view, it became complete shorthand in Star Wars circles for any bit of continuity that doesn't quite line up. 2 sources contradict each other. Somebody in the comments says, from a certain point of view, everyone moves on. Lucasfilm eventually leaned all the way in and used it as the title of an entire anthology series. Short stories retelling famous scenes from the perspective of background characters, which is a nice bit of self-awareness, turning your most famous fudge into a brand. One more thing before we move on, because it's the detail I think about most. Yoda backs him up. Right after the point of view speech, Yoda pipes up from wherever ghosts hang about and confirms it. Unexpected this is, and unfortunate. 900 years old, wisest being in the galaxy, and his contribution to the conversation is essentially, yeah, what he said. 2 Jedi Masters, both dead, both radiating serenity, both fully committed to the bit. And Luke, to his enormous credit, doesn't argue. He just absorbs it, the way you do when you realise the people who raised you were making it up as they went, and it's a bit late to do anything about it now. Which is a good place to leave it, I think. Because that hut on Tatooine is where the whole saga's habit really starts. Everything after it is people deciding what someone else is allowed to know. There's one more layer to it that I've always found quietly funny, and it's the alias. Obi-Wan spends 19 years hiding on Tatooine under the name Ben. That's the whole disguise. He grows a beard, he moves into a cave-adjacent hut in the middle of nowhere, and he goes by a shortened version of his own name, while living a moderate speeder ride from the family of the man he's hiding from. He keeps Anakin's lightsaber in a box. He watches the boy grow up from a distance, and he does all of this on the one planet in the galaxy that Darth Vader has a personal reason to remember. As witness protection, it's a shambles. As a lie, though, it's beautifully judged, because it's aimed at exactly the right audience. He isn't hiding from Vader, Vader is not spending his weekends checking the moisture farms of his childhood. He's hiding from everyone else, which mostly means Owen Lars, who knows precisely who he is and wants him nowhere near the boy. And the Ben thing means that when Luke does eventually turn up asking questions, the old man has a bit of runway. He can be a local eccentric who happens to know things, rather than a survivor of a massacre with an agenda. It gives him control of the pace. Small detail, but it's the same instinct as everything else in this section. Not a fabrication, just a careful choice about what to lead with. And nobody in this galaxy was better at that than the man in the red robes. Let's start with the length of it, because the length is the part that gets underrated. Palpatine holds the pose for somewhere north of 30 years. He's a sitting senator during the Naboo blockade, he's chancellor for the entire Clone Wars, and he's emperor for another 2 decades after that. And for the whole of the first half of that, he is standing in rooms with people who can sense deception as a basic professional skill, having conversations about how urgently they need to find him. 30 years, not a heist, not a weekend, a career. I think about the admin of it sometimes. The scheduling? He's running a war from both ends, which means 2 sets of communications, 2 sets of allies, 2 personalities, and no ability to ever mix them up in front of the wrong person. And he does it while holding down what is, on paper, the single most scrutinized public job in the galaxy. The thing that makes it work isn't the mask. It's that almost none of his lies are lies about facts. They're lies about motive. Everything he says is more or less true. It's the reason he's saying it that's fictional. Take Naboo, where he starts. His home planet is invaded and blockaded, and his queen comes to Coruscant looking for help. And she gets the Senate at its absolute worst. Procedure, committees, a request for a commission to investigate whether the invasion she personally fled from actually happened. And Palpatine leans in and suggests, very gently, that she call for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. Now look at that advice on its own. It's good advice, it's arguably the only advice. The Senate is stalling, Valorum is weak, and forcing the issue is the one lever she has left. Amidala takes it. The vote goes through, Valorum is out. And in the ensuing election, the sympathetic senator from the invaded planet is a very natural choice. He has himself elected to the highest office in the galaxy by having his own planet invaded and then being helpful about it. And nobody in the room feels manipulated because nothing he said was false. He just neglected to mention that the blockade was his idea in the first place. That's the whole method, really. Everything after this is variations on it. 10 years later, same trick, bigger stage. There's a separatist crisis, there's a shortage of time, and a motion goes to the Senate to grant the Chancellor emergency powers so he can act without waiting for debate. The motion is proposed by Jar Jar Binks, which is either the funniest or the saddest detail in the entire saga, depending on the day. And the Senate applauds, genuinely applauds. It's one of the few moments in the prequels that I find slightly upsetting to watch. That shot of a democracy giving itself away to a standing ovation. Palpatine accepts reluctantly and says he loves democracy. He loves the Republic, and the power they've given him, he'll lay down the moment the crisis has passed. He means it too, in the sense that he intends to say it. That's the register he works in. Sincerity as a tool. And then he runs the war, both sides of it. His apprentice leads the separatists. His other apprentice is being groomed inside the Jedi Order. And every emergency the Republic responds to is an emergency he scheduled. The Jedi spend 3 years scattered across a war they're commanding from the front, which means 3 years of not sitting in the temple, thinking carefully about anything, and I've always found that to be the cleverest part. He doesn't hide from the Jedi, he just keeps them extremely busy somewhere else. Fun detail I like here, and it's a small one. He asks. That's the bit that gets me. He doesn't sit there quietly, hoping the subject won't come up. He raises it himself, regularly, in the tone of a concerned head of state, who would very much like to be kept informed. Any progress on the search, anything he ought to know about. And the Jedi tell him, because why on earth wouldn't they? He's the man they're fighting a war for. So the most useful intelligence anyone in that conflict received came from a standing meeting the target had put in the diary himself, and there's not a false word anywhere in it. He just asked a question nobody thought was strange. Then comes the bit that always gets me, which is the kidnapping. At the start of Revenge of the Sith, Grievous captures the Chancellor over Coruscant, and Anakin and Obi-Wan mount a rescue. It's a great sequence, and it's entirely staged. He arranged his own abduction, sat calmly in the restraints, and waited for the boy he'd been cultivating for a decade to come and get him. And when Anakin arrives with Dooku, Palpatine tells him to kill him. Dooku, his own apprentice, kneeling and disarmed, looking up at his master with an expression I'd describe as dawning professional disappointment. Because Dooku had been lied to as well, obviously. That's the thing people forget about Palpatine. He wasn't running a conspiracy with partners, he was running a series of individual relationships in which everyone believed they were the exception. Dooku thought he was building a stronger republic and would be there at the end of it. Maul thought he was the chosen successor, right up until he wasn't. Anakin thought he was being offered a way to save his wife. That's the one that finishes the job, and it's worth sitting with because it's his masterpiece. The opera scene. Palpatine tells Anakin about a Sith Lord called Darth Plagueis the Wise, who was so powerful and so clever that he could use the Force to influence life itself, to stop the people he cared about from dying, and that he taught his apprentice everything he knew, and the apprentice killed him in his sleep. Ironic, he says. He could save others from death, but not himself. Here's the thing. As far as we can tell, most of that is true. Plagueis was real, he was Palpatine's master, and Palpatine did kill him. It's the single most honest thing Palpatine says in 6 films. It's practically a confession, and it's the most effective lie in the saga, because of what it implies rather than what it says. Anakin is having visions of his wife dying in childbirth, and he's just been handed a story about a man who could stop exactly that. The offer is never made explicitly. Palpatine never says, "I can teach you this." He tells a story about somebody else, and lets a desperate man do the rest of the work himself. No notes, as a piece of manipulation. Horrible, but no notes. The last one I want to mention is the biggest, and it's the one that outlives him. When it's done, when the temple has burned and the Jedi are scattered, he goes to the Senate and tells them there was a rebellion, that the Jedi attempted to seize control of the Republic, that they tried to assassinate him, that the scarring on his face is the evidence. And he announces that the Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society. And they applaud that too. What I find remarkable isn't that they believed it in the moment. Rooms panic, people applaud things. What's remarkable is that it's stuck. That story becomes the official history of the galaxy for the next 20-odd years. By the time we meet Luke on Tatooine, the Jedi aren't remembered as murdered public servants. They're a hokey old religion, a superstition. Han Solo, who is a well-travelled man of the world, doesn't believe the Force is real, and that's not stupidity on his part. That's a state education system working exactly as intended. That's the lie I'd nominate as his best work. Not the mask, not the war, not the opera, the fact that he took the most visible institution in the galaxy, one with a 1,000-year record, and a building you could see from orbit, and turned it into a rumour inside a single generation. Some of the lies in this saga move a scene along. That one moves history. There's a structural lie underneath all of this that I should mention because it's the one that made everything else possible. For roughly 1,000 years, the Jedi believed the Sith were extinct, not diminished, not hiding. Gone, finished, a closed chapter in a history book. And that belief was correct in every way that could be checked because the Sith had quite deliberately made themselves uncheckable. 2 of them at a time, ever. A master and an apprentice. No temples, no armies, no visible institution, nothing that could be found by looking for the sort of thing you'd expect to find. It's an astonishing bit of long-term thinking when you consider what it costs. Every generation of Sith spends its entire life invisible, achieving nothing anyone can see, on the understanding that eventually one of them will be standing in the right room at the right time. Whole lifetimes as setup, and it works so well that when a Sith finally does turn up in the flesh on Naboo, the Jedi Council's reaction is basically bewilderment. They can't decide whether the thing Qui-Gon fought was a master or an apprentice, because the possibility hasn't been live for 10 centuries. They eventually settle on the correct answer, which is that there are 2, and then spend the next decade unable to find the other one, largely because they're looking for something dramatic. And the other one is a politician who keeps offering them tea. The same trick works on individuals, incidentally. Maul is thrown down a shaft, cut in half, and written off by absolutely everybody, including his own master. And he survives it, half mad, out on a junk moon for years. Nobody looks, not the Jedi who saw him fall, and not Sidious, who had already moved on to Dooku and had no interest in an obsolete apprentice. Being presumed dead is the most useful lie available, and the Sith never had to tell it. They just let people finish the sentence themselves. And speaking of things that were quietly rewritten while nobody was watching, I want to talk about a library. There's a scene in Attack of the Clones where a man walks into a library and is told, very politely, that a planet doesn't exist. Obi-Wan has coordinates, he's got a physical location, he's got a name, Kamino, and he goes to the Jedi Archives, which is the largest and most respected collection of knowledge in the galaxy, and he asks to see it. And the archivist, Jocasta Nu, runs the search, finds nothing, and delivers one of my favourite lines in the whole prequel trilogy. If an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist. She says it kindly. She's not being obstructive. She genuinely believes it, and honestly, why wouldn't she? She spent her life curating the most complete record of the galaxy ever assembled. The idea that the record could be wrong isn't arrogance on her part so much as the entire premise of her job. And it's wrong. Somebody has been in there and taken a planet out. Obi-Wan, to his credit, doesn't accept it. He takes the problem downstairs to Yoda's class of younglings and lets a group of small children solve it in about 11 seconds. Which is a lovely bit of writing. If the gravity is pulling all the stars in the region toward a spot where there's nothing, then something used to be there, and somebody removed it from the archive memory. Right. So who did, and why? This is where it gets properly good, and I'll be honest, this is my favourite bit of plumbing in all of Star Wars. It's assembled across a film, 2 animated series, and a fair amount of supporting material. And when you put it all together, it's genuinely one of the tidiest crimes ever committed in fiction. It starts with a Jedi called Sifo Dyas. Sifo Dyas was a member of the Jedi Council, and he had visions. Bad ones. He became convinced that an enormous war was coming, and that the Republic, which hadn't had an army in centuries, was going to be flattened by it. He took this to the Council, and the Council said no, firmly enough that he ended up off the Council over it. And here's where a well-meaning man does something enormously stupid. He goes to Kamino anyway, on his own. He contacts Prime Minister Lama Su and commissions a clone army for the Republic. And he tells the Kaminoans that the order comes from the Senate, which it does not. Nobody in the Senate has authorized anything. Nobody on the Council knows. One Jedi acting entirely alone orders the largest army in modern galactic history and puts the Republic's name on the invoice. He believed he was saving people. I think that's important. There's no malice in Sifo Dyas anywhere in this story. He's a man who saw something terrible coming, got told to sit down, and decided the rules were less important than the thing he'd seen, which is a very human failure, and, frustratingly for everyone, he was also completely right about the war. He just wasn't around to see it. Not long after, Chancellor Valorum sent him on a quiet mission to Obadiah to deal with the Pike Syndicate, with Valorum's aide Silman travelling with him, and their shuttle was shot down. Sifo-Dyas died in the crash. Silman survived and was taken prisoner by the Pikes, which is a detail that matters later. The shuttle was shot down because Dooku paid the Pikes to do it. Dooku had already left the Jedi Order by this point, and had taken up with Palpatine under the name Darth Tyrannus, and the Sith had got wind of what Sifo-Dyas was building out on Kamino, and rather than shut it down, they simply took ownership of it. Dooku had the body recovered and taken to Felucia, and put it about that Sifo-Dyas had died in a local conflict there. Then he picked up the project where the dead man had left off, using the dead man's name. So when Obi-Wan finally lands on Kamino, sopping wet and completely bewildered, and Tarnway greets him warmly and says the Prime Minister has been expecting him, and Lama Su tells him the units are progressing well, and asks him to pass on their respects to Master Sifo-Dyas. They're not lying. They think they're delivering a contract. They think a Jedi ordered this because a Jedi did. They've been talking to someone using his name for a decade, and it never occurred to them to check because why would it? The army is 10 years into production, incidentally, and it's been growing the entire time the Jedi have been sitting in a temple on Coruscant with no idea it exists. And when Obi-Wan tracks down the genetic donor, Jango Fett, and asks him whether he was recruited by Sifo-Dyas, Jango says he's never heard that name in his life. He was hired by a man called Tyrannus. Obi-Wan doesn't know that name either. It means nothing to him. He files it away, and the answer he was looking for goes straight past him, because the two halves of that conversation are separated by information that only the villains have. Now the library, the Kamino entry, was deleted from the Jedi archives by Dooku, and this is where the timeline gets almost cheeky. It's shown in Tales of the Jedi in an episode called The Sith Lord, and it's set during the events of the Phantom Menace. Dooku, who has only just left the Order, walks back into the temple where he trained and where he taught, uses Sifo-Dyas' access to erase the planet, and while he's doing it, he gets word that his old apprentice Qui-Gon has run into trouble with somebody on Tatooine. He does it inside the building. He's not a hacker somewhere remote. He's a respected former master walking corridors he knows well, nodding at people who are pleased to see him, deleting a planet. That's the bit that gets me. Not the murder. The murder is standard Sith admin. It's the fact that the Order's biggest structural weakness was that it trusted its own people completely, and had no mechanism at all for the possibility that one of them had stopped being one of them. And then there's the last layer, which is the one that actually kills them. The clones were built with inhibitor chips in their heads, small implants, standard part of the package, and here's the part I find genuinely tragic. They were Sifo-Dyas' idea. He wanted a safeguard. He was worried about an army of soldiers being given an unlawful order by a Jedi who'd gone bad, and the chip was meant to stop that. It was a conscience clause, more or less. Sidious and Tyrannus had the Kaminoans reprogram them. Same hardware, opposite purpose. Instead of protecting the galaxy from a treacherous Jedi, the chip would, on a single command, turn every clone in the Grand Army against every Jedi alive. The Republic came within a hair of finding out too. A clone called Tup had his chip misfire early, on a completely unrelated campaign, and killed a Jedi Master in front of everybody without being able to explain why. And his mate Fives wouldn't let it go. He dug, he found the chip, he got it out, he worked out roughly what it was for, and he made it all the way to Coruscant to report it. He never got the chance to say it to anyone who could act on it. He ended up frightened, discredited, and dead in a corridor. And the official story was that he'd malfunctioned, which is one of the darker jokes the saga has ever made, because he hadn't malfunctioned. He was the only one working properly. So that's the shape of it. A good man tells one lie to build an army he thinks will save everyone. A bad man kills him, keeps the lie running, and edits the truth out of the library so nobody can check. And 10 years later, the Jedi accept delivery of the weapon that kills them gratefully, because it arrived exactly when they needed it and came with paperwork that had one of their own names on it. There's a coda to this, and it's one of the best hours of television the show ever produced. Years into the war, a Jedi's lightsaber turns up in the possession of the Pike Syndicate on Obadiah, and it turns out to be Sifo-Dyas's. Which is a problem, because Sifo-Dyas is supposed to have died on Felucia, and Felucia is not Obadiah, and lightsabers don't wander. So Obi-Wan and Anakin go and pull the thread, and the Pikes, who are not sentimental about anyone, tell them the shuttle was shot down on a contract, and that they still have the passenger, Silman, alive more or less, after all those years in a hole, and completely off his head from it. And he starts talking. He tells them there was a second Sith. He tells them about the deal. He starts getting close to a name. And Dooku arrives, because of course he does, and Silman dies mid-sentence. That's the closest the Jedi ever get. A mad prisoner in a cell halfway through a sentence. Yoda's reaction afterwards is the part I remember. There's no dramatic scoring, no vow of vengeance. He just observes that the Order has been arrogant, that it has allowed itself to be manoeuvred, and that a war they were manipulated into fighting has made them worse at the exact skill they'd need to notice. Then the Council closes the investigation, because there's a battle on somewhere, and the lead is dead. And that's how a conspiracy that murdered a Jedi Master, forged an army, and rewrote the archives ends up filed as an unresolved matter that nobody has time for. Anyway, since we're on the subject of people pretending to be someone they're not, I want to talk about the best-dressed lie in the saga. The throne room on Naboo is one of the great looks in this franchise, and I don't think it gets enough credit. The gowns are enormous and architectural, the headdresses are the size of small furniture, and the face is painted flat white, with a red mark down the centre of the lower lip, and a red dot on each cheek. The voice that comes out of it is deliberately low and slow, with all the ordinary music of speech taken out of it. It reads as ceremony, grand, remote, a bit alien. It's camouflage. That's the whole design. The white paint isn't decoration, it's a mask you're allowed to wear in public. The heavy costume hides body shape. The flattened voice hides accent and personality. And the point of all of it is that on any given day, the person inside that outfit might not be the Queen. Naboo elects its monarch, and the monarch they elected was 14 years old. And somewhere in that transition, somebody sensibly decided that a teenage head of state, in a galaxy full of bounty hunters, needed a system. So the handmaidens aren't handmaidens. They're security. They're trained, they're armed, they're loyal, and at least one of them can pass for the Queen well enough to sit on the throne and give orders while the actual Queen stands at the back of the room in a hooded robe, watching everything and being addressed by nobody. The one who does most of the standing in is Sabe, played by a very young Keira Knightley, and the casting is the best practical joke in the film. The resemblance to Natalie Portman under that makeup is so complete that the story everyone repeats is that their own mothers had trouble telling them apart on set. Whether that's been polished a bit over the years, I couldn't tell you, but I've watched those scenes a lot and I've never once caught it cleanly on a first pass. And the film plays fair with you. It's not hiding it. The decoy is in plain sight for most of the running time, doing the queening, while a quiet girl in brown fetches things and asks questions and gets ignored by everybody important, which is the bit I actually enjoy. Not the trick, the use of it. Because being invisible is enormously useful. When they crash on Tatooine, it's the handmaiden who goes into town, because handmaidens go into town. The Queen doesn't. So Padme gets to walk around a slave settlement, meet a 9-year-old with a pod racer, and form her own view of the galaxy's outer rim without a single official filter in the way. She learns more in one afternoon on Tatooine than she'd have learned in a year of briefings. The reveal comes later, in the Gungan sacred place, and it's the only moment the whole system gets used the way you'd expect it to be used in a film. The decoy is on the throne, Boss Nass is refusing to help, the alliance is going nowhere, and the girl at the back steps forward and says, "She's Queen Amidala," and kneels and asks for help. Boss Nass finds this hilarious, which is a very reasonable response. But it works, and it works precisely because of the fuss. She has spent the entire film hiding behind an office, and the one time she steps out from behind it, she does it by getting on the floor in front of somebody who has been treated as a joke by her own people for generations. The theatre and the humility land at the same time. That's a good scene. Fun detail I like. The decoys don't stop after Naboo. 10 years on, in Attack of the Clones, Padme arrives on Coruscant as a senator, and a decoy called Corday is walking down the ramp in her place when the ship explodes. Corday dies in her arms and apologises for failing her, which recontextualises the entire cheerful spy game business of the first film rather sharply. The system isn't a clever costume trick. Somebody's job is to be the one who gets killed instead, and eventually the bill comes in. Now, since we're on Naboo, there's a second lie running through those events, and it's a duller one, but I think it's the more honest portrayal of how anything bad actually happens. The Trade Federation blockade is illegal. Everyone knows it's illegal, and the Federation's entire strategy is to keep saying that it isn't calmly in the correct forum for long enough that the objection becomes a procedural matter rather than an invasion. 2 Jedi are sent to negotiate. The Federation tries to kill them within about 4 minutes, then reports to the Chancellor that no ambassadors ever arrived, and suggests it must have been a Republic ploy. It's such a flimsy lie. It would fall over instantly under any real scrutiny. But there isn't any real scrutiny because scrutiny requires someone to have the authority and the appetite to apply it, and the Senate has neither. So the Queen stands up in the Senate chamber and says her people are dying, and what she gets back is an objection. The Federation's delegate says the accusation is unfounded and requests that a commission be sent to Naboo to ascertain the truth. About whether an invasion she personally escaped from is happening. And that's the actual killer, not the lie itself. The lie doesn't need to be believed. It just needs to be plausible enough to trigger a process, because the process is slow and the invasion isn't. Nobody in that chamber is fooled. They just have a mechanism available that lets them not do anything, and the mechanism is offered to them, and they take it. We've talked about how the vote of no confidence comes out of that, so I won't go back over it. But it's worth sitting with the fact that the most consequential lie in the Naboo crisis wasn't the disguise or the assassination or the invasion. It was a suggestion that everyone slow down and check, sort of like how the worst decisions at any job are almost never made by someone saying no. They're made by someone saying, let's put a pin in that. Actually, hang on. One more thing on Naboo, because it's the detail that makes the whole disguise business click into place for me. Amidala isn't her name. Her name is Padme Naberi. She's from a family in the Lake Country. She has a mother and a father and a sister, and later on, nieces. Amidala is the name she takes when she's elected, the way a monarch takes a regnal name, and it comes as a set with the paint and the gowns and the voice. So when the handmaiden in the brown robe introduces herself to a 9-year-old on Tatooine as Padme, she's not using a cover identity at all. She's using the only real name she's got. The lie is the throne, not the girl. I think that's a lovely inversion, and it's the reason her half of the prequels works better than people give it credit for. The public figure is the costume. Everything that happens to her afterwards, the secret marriage, the double life, the constant management of who is allowed to see which version of her, is just an extension of a system she was handed at 14 and got extremely good at operating. The handmaidens all have names, by the way, and they're worth knowing because the film gives you almost nothing about them. Sabe is the main decoy. There's Rabe, Eatai, Yane, and Sashay as well. And they're not interchangeable. They've got jobs. Some of them stay behind on the occupied planet. They're a security detail dressed as staff, and the entire architecture only works because nobody in the galaxy thinks to look closely at the women standing behind a throne, which is a very old trick and one I suspect a lot of actual courts have run over the years without anyone writing it down. Right, that's enough politics. Let's go and spend some time with a man who lies purely for the fun of it. Mos Eisley, back booth. Two customers who very obviously need a ship more than the man selling it needs the fare. And Han, sizing them up, decides to lead with a boast. He asks if they've never heard of the Millennium Falcon. He tells them it's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Luke pulls a face. Obi-Wan, who is a lot better at this, says nothing at all. Now, a parsec is a unit of distance, not time. It's a real measurement used by real astronomers, and it comes out at about 3.26 light years, which is somewhere in the region of 19 trillion miles. So the sentence, as spoken, is roughly the equivalent of a bloke leaning across a bar and telling you his car did the M1 in under 4 miles. This has been an argument since 1977, and I find the whole thing enormously endearing, because there are basically 3 positions, and people have gone to war over all of them. Position 1. It's a mistake. Lucas wanted a word that sounded like it belonged in space. Parsec sounds a bit like second, in it went. And there's decent support for this, because the novelization of A New Hope, which came out before the film did, has Han saying standard time units instead, which is a phrase so limp I'm almost glad it didn't make it. Position 2, Han is lying. He's a smuggler with a price on his head talking to a farm boy and an old man. He needs money quickly, and he's throwing out impressive sounding nonsense to see whether these two know enough to catch it. Under this reading, Luke's expression isn't confusion, it's a 17-year-old failing to spot a con. And Obi-Wan's silence is a man who has clocked it and doesn't care because they need the ship. Position 3, and this is the official one now. He's telling the truth, and the Kessel Run is a distance problem rather than a speed problem. What I find lovely is that Lucas was already patching this in 1977. There are notes he recorded with Carol Teitelman that summer, while he was starting to build out the background of this world, and he describes the Falcon as a simple, economical ship whose modifications are mostly to the navigational system, so it can get through hyperspace in the shortest possible distance. That's the fix. It's right there, within months of release. He'd spotted the hole and quietly filled it before most people had even noticed there was one. And then the franchise spent 40 years slowly making it canon. In The Force Awakens, Rey works out which ship she's standing in and asks, in disbelief, whether this is the one that made the Kessel Run in 14 parsecs. And Han, from across the hold, immediately snaps back. 12. That's a fun little moment on its own, an old man correcting his own legend downward for accuracy. But structurally, it's the franchise voting. Rey has heard the story. The story has grown in the telling and got the number wrong. Han corrects it, which means it happened, which means he wasn't lying, which means the whole thing is now load-bearing. And then Solo goes and films it. I'll say up front that I like Solo more than most people seem to. It's a heist film with mud on it, and I think it's the most relaxed anything in this franchise has been in years. But the Kessel Run sequence is doing a slightly awkward job, because it has to physically depict a line of dialogue that has been argued about for 4 decades, and it can't afford to get it wrong. What it lands on is that the Kessel Run isn't a straight road. It's a route through a horrible bit of space full of gravity wells and things that will eat your ship. And the standard safe path around it is long. If you're willing to cut through the middle, the distance drops. So the boast is a boast about nerve and navigation, not engine power. Shortest possible distance, exactly as Lucas described it in 1977, dressed up with 40 years of extra scenery. And the detail that makes it work for me is that he rounds down. They come out the other side. Somebody points out that the number isn't quite under 12, and Han decides that it is if you round down. That's perfect. That is the correct amount of dishonesty for that character. Not a fabrication, just a generous bit of arithmetic that he will now repeat for the rest of his life as a flat fact. Because that's the thing about Han. He isn't really a liar in the way Palpatine is a liar. He's not building anything. He lies the way some people swear, as punctuation. Take the Death Star detention block, which is the greatest improvised lie in cinema, and I will not be arguing about this. The comms panel goes off. Somebody on the other end wants to know what's happening in there. And Han, who has just shot up a corridor and has no plan whatsoever, picks up the microphone and starts talking. Everything's under control. Situation normal. There's been a slight weapons malfunction, but everything's perfectly all right now. They're all fine here. Thank you, how are you? You can hear it collapsing in real time. He starts confident. He runs out of material by the second sentence, and by the end he's just making conversation with a man who is about to send soldiers. And when it fails, he shoots the panel and mutters that it was a boring conversation anyway. What I love is that nobody writes that line as a joke about a liar. They write it as a joke about a man who has always been able to talk his way out of things and has finally met a situation where the talking doesn't work. He does it constantly. The Falcon is described as fast, reliable, and in good condition, and it is none of those things. He tells Jabba there's been a slight delay. He tells everyone, repeatedly, at every possible opportunity, that he's leaving. He tells Leia he isn't interested. He says he's in it for the money, and then keeps turning up at battles where there is no money. That last one is the interesting version, actually. Most of Han's lies aren't aimed outward at all. They're aimed at himself, and they're all the same lie, which is that he doesn't care. He says it in every film he's in. He says it while doing something enormously inconvenient for people he claims not to care about. Nobody in the cast believes it either. Leia calls it early. Chewie has clearly never believed it for a second. Even Luke, who is not a perceptive man in the first film, works it out before the trench run. Anyway, he got 12 parsecs in the end, more or less if you round down, and 40 years of people arguing about a unit of distance turned a throwaway line into probably the most examined piece of dialogue in the whole saga. While we're here, there's a smaller boast in that same conversation that I think is more revealing than the famous one. He tells Obi-Wan he's outrun Imperial starships. Not the local bulk cruisers, mind, he means the big Corellian ships. Now that's a much more careful bit of salesmanship, and I love it. He anticipates the objection, dismisses a lesser version of his own claim, and then makes the bigger claim sound modest by comparison. That's not a man improvising. That's a man who has given this speech before and knows exactly where the customer usually pushes back. And the ship, of course, is a wreck. It's held together with enthusiasm. The hyperdrive fails at the worst possible moment in the next film. Twice. And Han's response both times is to hit something and look surprised. Then there's the question of how he got it at all, which produces two entirely different accounts, depending on who's telling it. Han's version throughout is that he won it, fair and square, in a game of sabacc from Lando Calrissian. Lando's version, when they finally meet on Bespin, is that Han swindled him out of it. He says it while smiling, in front of everyone, in the tone of a man who has been rehearsing that greeting for a few years. The films never adjudicate. Solo has a go at it, and lands on something that lets them both be right, which is exactly the diplomatic answer a prequel is obliged to give. But in the original trilogy, it just sits there, unresolved, two friends with two irreconcilable stories about the same card game, both of them completely certain. Which brings us neatly to the other thing everyone argues about in that cantina. And this one, I'm sorry to say, isn't even a real question. Here's a thing that took me an embarrassingly long time to notice. And once you notice it, You can't stop noticing it. The phrase is wrong. Han shot first. It's on t-shirts, it's on mugs, it's been an argument at parties since the 90s. And in the 1977 film, Greedo does not fire. Not first, not second, not at all. He points a blaster. He does some monologuing about how long he's been looking forward to this. Han says he bets he has. And then there's a bang under the table, and Greedo is face down in his drink. So Han didn't shoot first. Han shot. He was the only participant. The word first implies a sequence, and there wasn't one, which is a bit of a beautiful mess when you think about it. The most famous fan objection in film history is built on a phrase that describes a version of the scene nobody has ever seen. Right, let's do the actual history, because this scene has been edited more times than most people realise, and I find the trail genuinely funny. 1977, as described. One shot, one body, and the audience learns everything it needs to know about Han Solo in about 2 seconds. He's charming, he's broke, he's dangerous, and he will absolutely kill you under a table while smiling. 1997. The special editions come out and the scene has a new insert. Greedo fires, misses from roughly the distance of a dining chair, and Han fires back. Suddenly it's self-defense. 2004. The DVDs arrive and it's been fiddled with again. The two shots are now nearly simultaneous and Han's head tilts out of the way, which at least makes the miss slightly less humiliating for Greedo. 2019. Star Wars turns up on Disney Plus on 12 November, and people watching A New Hope stop, rewind, and check with each other, because Greedo now says a word before he fires. It sounds like McClunky. It is not translated, it is not explained. Disney confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter that the change was made by Lucas himself before the company was sold in 2012. So it had apparently been sitting on a hard drive somewhere for years, waiting. McClunky. I think about that word more than is healthy. Now the reason this section is in a video about lying isn't the edits. Directors fiddle with their films. That's allowed. And I've got no particular horse in that race. It's what Lucas has said about it since. In 2012, he told The Hollywood Reporter that the whole controversy was a misunderstanding, that the scene had been shot entirely in close-ups, that it was confusing about who did what to whom, and that all he'd done in 1997 was add a wider shot to make it clear that Greedo was the one who shot first. Everyone wanted to think Han shot first, he said, because they wanted him to be a cold-blooded killer. That's a fairly extraordinary thing to say about a scene in which one man fires a weapon and the other man does not. And then a few years later, talking to the Washington Post, he gave a completely different explanation, and this one I actually rather like. He said he was thinking mythologically. Han was going to end up with Leia, and the question was whether he should be a cold-blooded killer or whether he should be a cowboy. Should he be John Wayne? And Lucas decided he should be John Wayne, and John Wayne doesn't shoot first. He lets the other man draw. Those two accounts don't sit together at all. One says nothing changed, and you all misread the edit. The other says something changed, deliberately, for reasons of mythology and character. The first is a denial. The second is a defense. And they were given by the same man, about the same 3 seconds of film. There's a footnote to this that I enjoy enormously. In 2015, a librarian at a university in Canada, Christiane Brown, came across an old copy of the 4th draft script while cataloguing a collection, and she read the cantina scene and told the CBC that based on the script, she could tell you 100% that Han shot first. A librarian settled it. After nearly 40 years of internet warfare, the definitive ruling came from someone doing an inventory. Harrison Ford's position on all this, for the record, is my favourite. He was asked about it directly during an online Q&A in 2014 and said he didn't know and he didn't care, which is the correct answer and also a bit of a shame because I do care. And here's why. It's not about violence, and it's not really about the edit. It's about what the scene is for. That booth is Han's introduction. It's the only information you get about him before you hand him your money and your 2 droids and the fate of the galaxy. And in 1977, the information is this man will do something ruthless if he has to, and he will not agonize about it afterwards. Take that away, and his arc goes with it. The whole point of Han is that he starts as a man who shoots people under tables for money and ends as a man who turns his ship around and comes back for someone else's fight. If he was never the first thing, the second thing isn't a change, it's just a nice bloke being nice. And the odd part is that Lucas built that arc. He wrote it. He knows better than anyone what the scene was doing. He just decided, 20 years later, that he'd rather his cowboy behaved like a cowboy. I don't think that's villainy. I think it's a much more ordinary and recognisable thing, which is a person looking back at something they made when they were young and wishing they'd been slightly more respectable about it, which, funnily enough, is a habit that goes a lot further than one scene in a cantina. But we'll get to that. And there's a footnote to that habit which is, one of the great ironies in film history, and I'd feel dishonest leaving it out of a video called this. On the 3rd of March, 1988, George Lucas gave testimony to a United States Senate subcommittee. The hearing was about copyright, and specifically about whether America should sign up to an international agreement that would give artists moral rights over their own finished work. The immediate trigger was colorization. Old black and white films were being bought up and tinted for the home video market, and a lot of directors were furious about it. So Lucas went to Washington, alongside Steven Spielberg and James Stewart and several others, to argue that this shouldn't be allowed, and he did not hold back. He told the committee that people who alter or destroy works of art and cultural heritage for profit or as an exercise of power are barbarians. He said that if American law continued to permit it, history would classify the country as a barbaric society. He said cultural history must not be allowed to be rewritten. He also made a prediction, and this is the part that genuinely unsettles me. He warned that more advanced technology would soon be able to replace actors with fresher faces or alter dialogue and change the movement of an actor's lips to match. 9 years later, the special editions came out. Now, in fairness to him, and I do want to be fair, his position has an internal logic. His argument in 1988 was about other people altering a filmmaker's work without permission. He was the filmmaker. The changes were his to make, and he said as much repeatedly that these are his films and he's entitled to finish them the way he wants. That's a defensible line. It's the line I'd take in his position. The problem is the second half of what he asked for in that room, which was that the public should retain access to the original version. That's the bit that hasn't happened. The 1977 cut has never had a proper modern release, and for years the only way to see the film as it appeared in cinemas was through fan restorations of varying legality. So the objection has never really been that he changed them. It's that the thing he warned Congress about, a version of a film disappearing so that only the revised one exists, is the outcome he ended up producing himself, on his own work, by choice. For now, let's leave Tatooine and talk about a lie that somebody told very deliberately, about someone who hadn't done anything at all. The image I keep coming back to is a girl running through the underlevels of Coruscant. Not the shining bit, not the towers and the traffic lanes and the endless golden sunset that Coruscant seems to be permanently having. The bottom, pipes, steam, industrial dark, the sort of place where the city's own weight is pressing down on you. And Ahsoka Tano, 17 or so, is down there being hunted by every clone trooper in the capital, on the orders of the people who raised her. It's one of the best stretches of animation the franchise has produced, and it comes from a fairly simple setup, which is that somebody told a lie, and it worked. The Jedi Temple gets bombed. Not the whole temple, a hangar, but people die, including clones and temple staff, and it's the first time the war has physically reached the Order's front door. The investigation lands on a woman called Letta Termund, who had been feeding her husband nanodroids that were then detonated inside him. So her husband was the bomb, and he didn't know it. Ahsoka brings her in. And in custody, Letta starts saying she wants to talk to Ahsoka specifically, that she has something to say about who put her up to it, that a Jedi was involved. And when Ahsoka goes down to the cell alone, Letta starts choking. Force choke, invisible hands, nobody else in the room. She dies in front of the security cameras with Ahsoka standing there. That's the frame. It's clean, it's fast, and it's built by someone who knows exactly how the Order works. What follows is the part I find hard to watch, and it isn't the chase. It's the speed with which everyone folds, because look at what they're weighing. On one side, a recording of an ambiguous few seconds. On the other, years. Ahsoka has been at the centre of this war since she was 14. She has fought on every front they've asked her to. Half the council have been in the field with her. She is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most known quantities in the entire Order. And within about a day, she's in a cell. She escapes, obviously, because she's Ahsoka, and that's where the underlevels come in. And escaping is the worst thing she can do, and she knows it, because running looks like guilt, and there's no version of standing still that ends well either. She ends up briefly working alongside Asajj Ventress, of all people, which tells you how thoroughly her own side has closed the door. And then she's found in a warehouse full of the exact nanodroids used in the bombing, which she didn't put there, and the case is closed. Anakin is the one who catches her. He brings her in himself, and she looks at him and asks him plainly whether he believes her. Then comes the council scene, and this is the bit I actually want to talk about, because it's the real lie in this story, and nobody in it is technically saying anything false. The Order expels her, not suspends, not stands her down pending an investigation. Expels her from the Jedi Order and hands her over to the Republic military for trial, which means a military tribunal, which means Tarkin prosecuting, which means the death penalty is on the table for a teenager they trained. And the reason given is that the Order has to be seen to act, that the Jedi cannot be perceived to protect their own, that the Senate is watching, public confidence is fragile, and the appearance of impartiality matters. Every word of that is true. That's what makes it so grim. They're not lying about the facts, they're just choosing which truth to organise themselves around, and the one they pick is the one that costs the institution the least. Plo Koon doesn't want to do it. You can see it. Obi-Wan doesn't want to do it. Anakin is openly falling apart about it. And they do it anyway, because there's a war on, and the Order has spent 3 years learning to make the expedient choice quickly. And by this point, it barely registers as a choice at all. Ahsoka takes off her Padawan braid and walks out, which is a hell of a thing to animate, and they get it right, because nobody says anything. Anakin, to his credit, refuses to accept it, and he's the one who actually goes and does the work. He tracks down the person who put the nanodroids in that warehouse, and it turns out to be Barriss Offee. Barriss is the detail that makes this story stay with me. She's a Padawan too. She and Ahsoka fought together. They were friends in a way the Order didn't much encourage. She's quiet, she's disciplined, she's Luminara Undali's apprentice. And if you'd asked anyone to name the least likely person in the building, she'd have been on the shortlist. And when she's brought in and asked to explain herself, she doesn't deny it. She stands up in front of the tribunal and says she did it because the Jedi have lost their way, that they've become an army fighting for the dark side, that they've fallen from the values they used to hold, and that she was the one willing to say it out loud. The awful thing is that she isn't entirely wrong. Not about the bombing, obviously. The bombing is indefensible, and she killed people. But the diagnosis underneath it, that a peacekeeping order has quietly become a military command structure and stopped noticing, is basically the thesis of the entire Clone Wars series. And it's the same rot that lets them hand a child over to Tarkin to protect their reputation. She's right about the disease and completely monstrous about the cure, both at once. That's a genuinely uncomfortable piece of writing for a show that started out selling toys. Ahsoka is exonerated, of course she is, and they call her back in, and the council apologises, more or less. And Yoda tells her this was a trial she had to face, a great trial of the Force, and that she has passed it, and they offer to make her a Jedi Knight. And she says no. She hands back the lightsaber and walks down the steps and out of the temple, and the last shot is Anakin standing at the top of them, watching her go and not going after her. I've seen people argue that she's being childish there, that the Order made a hard call under pressure and apologised, and she should have taken the promotion. I don't buy it, and here's why. They didn't apologise for being wrong. They framed it as a test. Yoda's line that this was a trial she had to face quietly turns the whole thing into something that happened for her benefit. It converts an institutional failure into a spiritual exercise. And the offer of knighthood isn't restitution, it's the Order closing the file. She isn't leaving because they doubted her. She's leaving because of how comfortable they were doing it, and how quickly they were ready to move on. The detail that always makes me wince, though, is who ends up prosecuting her. Tarkin. That Tarkin. Years before the Death Star, before the uniform we know him in, working as a Republic officer and quietly forming his opinion of the Jedi Order at close range. He argues that a Jedi accused of a crime against the Republic should be tried by the Republic, and he wins that argument, and the Order hands her over. Which means the man who will later stand on a bridge and calmly order the destruction of a planet got his first proper look at how the Jedi handle pressure, and what he learned was that they'll fold if you push in the right place. That's not spelled out anywhere. It doesn't have to be. As for Ahsoka, she never goes back. That's the thing people forget when they talk about that ending as a teenage strop. She has a long life after it, and we've seen a fair chunk of it since. She turns up during the rebellion, working under a code name, quietly propping up a resistance from the outside. She keeps the training. She keeps the principles. She keeps helping. She simply never again puts herself inside an institution that gets to decide what she is. And when you watch her later, calm and dry and slightly amused by everyone, you can see the shape of that afternoon on the temple steps still sitting in her. I don't think the Order ever understood what it lost there either. They lost a fully trained knight, obviously, but they also lost the only person in the building who had personally experienced what their judgment was worth under pressure, and who might have said so out loud in a meeting, before it mattered. Anyway, that one always sits a bit heavy, so let's go somewhere lighter and talk about the man who told the biggest lie about Star Wars from outside the story. Let's start with a number, and then watch it move. 12. In the years after the first film came out, that was the number floating around. 12 Star Wars films. It was in interviews. It was in press coverage. It was the sort of thing everyone repeated because Lucasfilm didn't discourage it. An epic in 12 parts. A saga so large that the film you'd just watched was only a fragment of it. Then Return of the Jedi came out, and the number changed. Lucas said he'd never said 12. That was the journalists, apparently. He'd always said 9. 3 trilogies, one of which you'd now seen, with 3 before it and 3 after. Then later, the number moved again. 6. 6 was always the plan. The story was Anakin's. It began with a boy on Tatooine and ended with a man in a mask being carried out by his son. And that was the whole thing. Complete. Finished. He'd never said there would be a 3rd trilogy. Journalists again. I want to be careful here because it's very easy to do a smug little takedown of this, and I don't think that's the interesting version. But the drift is real and it's documented, and 2 books came out in 2007 that did the actual work. One is J.W. Rinzler's The Making of Star Wars, which was authorised and had access to the Lucasfilm archives. The other is Michael Kaminsky's The Secret History of Star Wars, which was not authorised and was assembled out of about 400 sources, old magazine interviews, newspaper pieces, laser disc commentaries, and crucially, the actual drafts. That last bit is the killer, and it's why this argument ended. The scripts exist. Multiple drafts of all of them, dated in archives, some of them in the hands of collectors and universities. You cannot really claim a plot twist was always there when the drafts are sitting in a box with a date on the cover. So here's what the drafts show. The first film wasn't Episode 4. It was just Star Wars. The episode number and the subtitle weren't in the crawl in 1977 at all. They were added for a re-release a few years later, once the second film was underway and the numbering scheme had been invented. And Darth Vader was not Luke's father. Not in the first film, not in the treatments before it, not in the drafts. In the 1977 film, Vader is a fallen pupil who murdered Anakin Skywalker, and there's no wink in it. It's played completely straight because at the time, it was completely true. The twist arrives during the writing of The Empire Strikes Back. Lee Brackett, a brilliant seasoned science fiction writer who'd worked on The Big Sleep and Rio Bravo, wrote the first draft. Then she died of cancer, very shortly after handing it in, before Lucas had really had a chance to sit down with her about it. And he found himself with no writer available and a film to make, so he wrote the next draft himself. That's the draft with the father in it. That's also, incidentally, the draft where he first started using the episode numbering. So the single most famous plot twist in film history came out of a rewrite Lucas did alone, under pressure, after a bereavement, on a sequel he hadn't originally planned to be the middle of anything. Which I think is a far better story than it was always the plan, and I've never understood why he preferred the other one. Leia arrives later still. The sister thing isn't in the earlier material either, and if you watch Empire with that in mind, the film is quite clearly not written by someone who thinks those two are siblings. The story compresses into Return of the Jedi because there was a decision to finish it in 3 films rather than keep going, and the third trilogy that had been talked about for years quietly stopped being talked about. Right, so why do it? Why keep insisting it was all mapped out? Kaminsky's own reading is the generous one, and I think it's mostly correct. He suggests the exaggerations were partly publicity and partly security. If the story is changing radically between films, and you'd like nobody to guess where it's going, then loudly asserting that everything is already written and locked in a vault is a very effective way of shutting down speculation. It also protects you from the accusation of making it up as you go, which audiences are weirdly hostile to, even though every good story ever told was made up as somebody went. And there's a third reason, which is just human. Everybody tidies their own origin story, and the tidy version is the one that survives being told 100 times. The difference is that most of us don't have 400 sources and a set of dated drafts sitting in an archive waiting to be checked. Lucas made something so enormous that his personal recollection became a matter of public record and then got audited against the paperwork. That's a genuinely unusual fate for a person's memory. There's a smaller one in the same family that I find quite charming. The novelization of the first film came out with Lucas's name on the cover. It was written by Alan Dean Foster, a working science fiction novelist who was hired to do it and who also wrote the first ever Star Wars sequel novel. That's not scandalous. Ghostwriting is a completely normal arrangement and it was in the contract. But it does mean that the first prose version of Star Wars, the one that came out before the film and had Han measuring the Kessel Run in a different unit entirely, is a book by a man whose name isn't on it. And then there's the fan mythology, which is its own category of things that aren't true. The best one, obviously, is the Darth Vader name business. You'll have heard it. Vader means father in Dutch, therefore Lucas hid the twist in the character's name from day one, therefore it was always planned. It's the wrong language for a start, and the timing doesn't work regardless, because the twist didn't exist when the name did. Lucas has consistently said the resemblance to the German word for father is a coincidence, and given that the character had no son at the point he was named, It more or less has to be. But I understand why the theory refuses to die. It's a much more satisfying universe if the clues were there the whole time. Nobody wants their favourite story to have been assembled. They want it to have been discovered. Which is, when you get down to it, the same instinct that had Obi-Wan explaining to Luke that he'd been telling the truth all along. While we're in this territory, there are two more bits of received wisdom worth poking at, because both get repeated with total confidence, and both are shakier than people think. The first is that the Ewoks were originally Wookiees. You'll have heard this one framed as fact. Lucas wanted the third film's ground battle to be fought by Chewbacca's species, then decided Wookiees had become too technological to plausibly beat an empire with sticks, so he shrank them into teddy bears and invented Endor. The kernel of it is real. The idea of returning to Chewbacca's home planet and having the natives rise up was knocking about during development, and Kashyyyk did eventually get used, decades later, in Revenge of the Sith. But the tidy causal chain, that Ewoks are simply small Wookiees because of one specific decision, is a fan summary of a much messier process. And the name similarity does an enormous amount of work in convincing people it must be true. The second is the Jar Jar one, and I'm fond of this one because of how it happened. Somebody wrote a very long, very detailed post arguing that Jar Jar Binks was originally intended to be a hidden Sith Lord, that his clumsiness was a disguise, that his movements resemble martial arts forms, and that the plan was abandoned after the backlash. And it spread everywhere because it's a brilliant piece of writing and because it retroactively makes the most disliked character in the saga into the cleverest thing in it. It isn't true. It was never a plan. It's a theory, and its author was fairly upfront about that. But it refuses to die, and I think the reason is the same one we keep bumping into. People would rather believe a thing was designed than admit it just happened. A secret Sith is a better story than a comedy sidekick who didn't land. In the same way that a 12-part saga mapped out in 1973 is a better story than a man rewriting a sequel at his kitchen table after his co-writer died. Nobody's lying in either case. It's just that a well-shaped explanation will beat a true one 9 times out of 10, given enough time and enough retelling. Anyway, that's enough of what happened behind the camera for now. Let's go back inside and look at the people we're supposed to be rooting for, because they lie constantly and nobody ever seems to mind. Leia is 19 years old. She has been dragged onto a space station by the man who has just killed her crew, and she is being questioned by Grand Moff Tarkin about the location of the rebel base. And she lies to his face. Not a clever lie, a working one. She tells him the base is on Dantooine. Dantooine is real, it's remote, it's plausible, and it's a very long way from Yavin. It buys time. It sends the Empire in the wrong direction, and it costs her nothing to say. Tarkin thanks her and destroys Alderaan anyway. And then a little later, once the Empire has checked, Tarkin gets the confirmation that there was a base on Dantooine and that it had been abandoned for years. Which he takes surprisingly well. He'd already got what he wanted out of the exchange, which was her watching. I've always thought that whole sequence is the most brutal thing in the original film, and it's brutal because of the lie rather than the planet. She gambles that giving him something will save her world, and he takes the something and blows up the world regardless. And the lesson she learns at 19 is that there is nothing you can say to these people that will change what they were always going to do. It's not her first lie of the day either. When Vader boards her ship at the very start, she goes straight in with it. This is a consular ship. She's on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan. And Vader, who has just watched her ship flee a battle over stolen plans, points out that if it's a consular ship, there ought to be an ambassador aboard. She's a 19-year-old senator lying to Darth Vader, and her tell is nothing. Not a flicker. I bring all this up because I think there's a fun asymmetry in Star Wars that nobody ever comments on, which is that the heroes lie constantly, and the films are completely relaxed about it. Take the single, most famous example, which is so normalised that people forget it's a lie at all. Two stormtroopers stop a speeder in the Jundland wastes. They want to see identification, and Obi-Wan waves a hand and tells them that these aren't the droids they're looking for, and that they can go about their business, and the trooper repeats it back and lets them through. That is mind control. That's an elderly stranger reaching into a working man's head, editing what he can perceive, and sending him off to file a report that will be entirely fictional. If a Sith did that in any other scene, the score would go all ominous, and someone would say something about the dark side. Here it's a laugh. It's a lovely little demonstration beat. It establishes what the Force can do, Luke is impressed, and we move on. And the film's right, in fairness. It works because the stakes are low, and the target is a bloke doing a checkpoint. But it does mean the Jedi have an institutional lying tool built directly into their religion, used casually, taught to children, and never once discussed as an ethical problem by anybody in 6 films. Then there's Luke, who arrives in Leia's cell in a stormtrooper helmet and delivers the worst rescue introduction in history. He takes the helmet off and announces that he's Luke Skywalker. He's here to rescue her. She's not impressed. The plan is visibly nonsense, and she works that out within about 90 seconds, at which point she takes over. But the thing I love about that scene is what he says next, when the announcement lands with a thud. He tells her he's got her father's lightsaber, and that he's here with Ben Kenobi, and she immediately gets up because that's the part with actual information in it, which is a nice little detail on its own, but it's a much better one once you know about the family situation, because Luke is standing in that cell telling his own sister that he's brought her father's lightsaber, which is true in a way he could not possibly have intended, using an explanation he got from a man who was managing what both of them were allowed to know. We've been through the point of view business already, so I won't chew it again. But that cell is where the two halves of that lie stand in the same room for the first time. Then there's Lando, who I think gets a rough deal. He greets his old friend on a landing platform, makes a joke about him swindling him out of the Falcon, and tells him he's just made a deal that will keep the Empire out of Cloud City forever. And every word of that is technically accurate. He has made a deal. The Empire will indeed leave. And he walks them straight into a dining room, with Vader sitting at the head of the table. What redeems Lando, for me, is how quickly the arrangement rots and how visibly he hates it. The deal keeps getting altered in front of him, and each time he complains, the alterations are getting worse, and each time he's told, quite reasonably, that he should pray they don't get altered further. He's a man who tried to run a small independent operation next to an empire and discovered that agreements with an empire are only ever a courtesy. By the end of it he's evacuated his city, and he's flying the ship he lost in a card game into the second Death Star. That's a solid recovery from a bad Tuesday. Which brings us to Endor, and the biggest one on this list. The Rebel Alliance receives information. The second Death Star is incomplete and unshielded. The Emperor is aboard. The shield generator is on the forest moon and lightly defended. It's a golden opportunity, and it's the opportunity that everything they've built has been waiting for. Every bit of that is bait. The Emperor allowed it to reach them. He says so out loud with obvious enjoyment. The station is operational, the fleet is waiting on the far side of the moon, and an entire legion of his best troops is sitting on that forest moon specifically to meet the strike team. Akbar's line has become a joke online, but it's worth remembering how accurate and how late it is. By the time anyone says it, the fleet has already dropped out of hyperspace with no way back. And here's the part I like. It doesn't work. The trap is perfect. The intelligence was fabricated, the rebellion did everything wrong, and they still win. Because the one variable nobody modelled was several hundred extremely annoyed locals with logs. Which is a very Star Wars answer to a very well-constructed lie. And then there's Rogue One, which is a film almost entirely made of this, and which I think is the most honest thing the franchise has produced about what a rebellion actually involves. Start with Galen Erso, because his is the longest single deception on this list. He's a scientist who gets pulled back into the Empire's weapons program against his will, and he makes a decision that costs him everything. He stays, he works, he is to every observer, including his own daughter, a collaborator building the worst thing anyone has ever built. And he spends those years quietly designing a flaw into the reactor, a weakness that will destroy the station if anyone ever puts a shot in exactly the right place. The cruelty of it is that the deception only works if it's total. He can't leave a note. He can't tip anyone off. He can't even let Jin believe he's anything other than what he appears to be, because a rumour would end it. He has to be, in every visible respect, the man who built the Death Star, and he has to accept that this is probably what he'll be remembered as. That's the exhaust port, by the way. The one everyone spent decades calling a design flaw. It wasn't a flaw, it was a signature. Then there's Bodhi Rook, who is the small human version of the same thing, an Imperial cargo pilot who defects, carrying the message out, and whose entire contribution to the rebellion is the decision to stop pretending. He spends most of the film frightened and slightly bewildered, which I appreciate enormously, because that's what that would actually be like. And then there's Cassian, who lies to Jin. He's sent to find her father, and his orders aren't to extract him. His orders are to kill him, and he doesn't tell her that. He carries it the whole way, right up to the moment on the platform when he's lying in the rain with a rifle, looking at the man through a scope, and doesn't take the shot. She finds out later, obviously, and it's an ugly scene, and he doesn't really defend himself. What he says instead is that he's been doing this since he was 6 years old, and that everyone on that ship has done things they'd rather not have done, and asks her whether she thinks any of them wanted to. That's the least glamorous line in Star Wars, and it might be my favourite. It reframes the Rebel Alliance from a plucky underdog with a nice logo into an organisation that has been running assassinations and lying to its own people for 20 years because the alternative was losing. Nothing about that is presented as heroic. It's presented as the cost of the thing. Anyway, speaking of stories that get retold until nobody's quite sure which version is real, I want to talk about A Night in a Hut. One event, 3 accounts, all from people who were there, none of them agreeing, and the film simply hands you all 3 and lets you sort it out. I think it's the cleverest thing in the sequel trilogy, and I'll happily argue about that with anyone. The event is the night Luke's Jedi temple burned, and the first version you get is Luke's, told on a cliff on Ahch-To, in the flat voice of a man who has told himself this one so many times it's gone smooth. He was training a new generation. He had a dozen students. One of them was his nephew, and he had raw power, the like of which Luke had never seen. And Snoke got to him and turned him, and the boy destroyed everything Luke had built and walked away with a handful of others. It's a tidy story. It's got a villain who isn't in the room. It's got a tragic inevitability to it, and it lets Luke be a man who failed rather than a man who did something. Then you get Kylo's version, and it's a completely different film. He was asleep. He woke up and his master was standing over him with a lit lightsaber, looking at him the way you'd look at something you were about to put down. And he defended himself, and the hut came down, and he ran. Which is, I have to say, the only reasonable thing to do in that situation. 2 accounts, no overlap, both delivered with total conviction. And crucially, the film doesn't nudge you toward one. It shows both, staged identically, with the differences buried in details you're not certain you're seeing properly. And then, later, Luke tells the truth. He went to the hut that night because he'd sensed something in his nephew and wanted to look at it directly. And what he found was worse than he'd feared, a mind already turned, and a vision of everything the boy would go on to do. And for 1 second, one absolutely instinctive second, he lit the blade. And then it passed. It passed almost immediately, and he was standing there in the dark, appalled at himself, a middle-aged man holding a weapon over a sleeping child. And Ben opened his eyes. That's the whole thing. Both earlier versions are true. Kylo really did wake up to that image, Luke really didn't intend to do it. The difference between them is 1 second of shame that only one person in the room experienced, and there is no possible way to communicate it afterwards to the person who saw the rest. What I find so good about this is that it isn't a mystery box. It's not a puzzle with a solution you unlock. It's just an honest depiction of how memory works when something unbearable happens. Everyone does this. Everyone has a version of the worst argument they've ever had, and it's got a shape, and the shape puts them in a slightly better light than the recording would. Not through dishonesty, through the ordinary mechanics of being a person who has to keep living afterwards. Luke's first version isn't a lie he tells Rey. It's a lie he needed to keep breathing on that island for 6 years. And the reason he can finally say the real one out loud is that she's already gone and found the other version herself, so the smooth one has stopped working. Now, since we're on the subject of Skywalkers editing their own conduct, let's talk about the father, because he's the world champion. Anakin's honesty problem doesn't start with anything dramatic. It starts with a marriage. He's a Jedi, Jedi don't marry, and he marries a senator in secret, and then lives inside that omission for 3 years, reporting to a council he's lying to by simply arriving at work each morning. And that's the thing that makes him workable, from the Sith point of view. It's not the fear, and it's not the power. It's that he already has one enormous thing he can't tell anybody. So he's had years of practice at holding a compartment shut. Adding a second one isn't a leap. It's a habit. By the time we get to Mustafar, the compartments have taken over entirely. He tells Padmé that he's brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to his new empire. He has, that same day, participated in the murder of everyone he grew up with, including children, and installed a dictator. And he doesn't say it defensively. He says it like a man reporting good news, expecting her to be pleased. I find that harder to listen to than anything else in the scene, purely because of how pleased he sounds. Then he tells her he's doing it for her, that he's become powerful enough to stop people dying, that he can overthrow the Emperor, that they can rule together and put things in order. That's the lie he's living in, and it's a good one, because it's structured so that everything he does becomes an act of love. Every atrocity is a step towards saving her. The worse it gets, the more devoted he must be. And she's the one who breaks it, which is why she has to be removed from the equation for the rest of the story to happen. She looks at him and tells him he's going down a path she can't follow, and he can't process it because the entire architecture of his self-justification requires her to be grateful. And if she isn't grateful, then he isn't a man saving his wife. He's just a man who did all that. So he decides she's betrayed him. Instantly. It's the only available move, and it's the quickest bit of thinking he does in the entire film. Then Obi-Wan gets off the ship, and the last honest sentence either of them will ever say to each other gets said on a lava bank. Anakin tells him that from his point of view, the Jedi are evil, which I'd point out is the same construction we started this whole thing with. Point of view is a place to stand when the facts have gone against you. And Obi-Wan says, near the end of it, that Anakin was his brother, and that he loved him. That line does a lot of work. It's the one moment in the sequence where nobody's arguing a position. It's just a statement of fact from a man who has run out of arguments, and it's the reason the whole scene hurts rather than just being loud. And here's the bit that ties this section to the very first thing we talked about. And then I'll leave it alone. The version of Anakin that Obi-Wan carries out of that place, the one where a good man was destroyed and something else took his body, is not a story he invents later to protect a child. He's already telling it to himself, on the bank, while it's still happening, which means that by the time he says it in a hut on Tatooine 19 years later, it isn't even a decision. It's just what he's got. There's one more lie in that family, and it's the biggest one. Either twin lives inside, because it starts on the day they're born. Padmé dies, the babies are split, and a decision is made in a corridor by 3 exhausted people. The boy goes to Tatooine to be raised as a farmer's nephew. The girl goes to Alderaan to be raised as a princess. Neither is told about the other. neither is told about either parent. And both of those upbringings are, in their way, kind. Bail and Breha Organa adopt Leia properly and love her properly, and she grows up with every advantage a person can have. Owen and Beru raise Luke with a roof and food and a great deal of patience, and they lie to him constantly about who his father was, and they do it because they are frightened for him. The result is two people who spend their entire early lives with a piece missing and a galaxy full of adults who know exactly what it is and have all agreed not to say. There's a scene in Return of the Jedi where Luke asks Leia what she remembers of her real mother, and she does remember something. Images, feelings, a sense that she was beautiful but sad. She was less than a day old, and it's the Force rather than memory, which is the only way that line makes sense, but it's a genuinely lovely moment. And what strikes me about it now is that she's describing a woman she was never told existed. To a brother she only found out about that afternoon, because a plan made in a corridor 20-odd years earlier is finally coming apart. Two people comparing notes on a mother neither of them was ever told about. That corridor decision took about 90 seconds to make, and the better part of 23 years to come apart. Right, let's come forward in time a bit and talk about a lie told to a girl about who she came from. There's a question the sequel trilogy keeps asking, and it keeps answering it differently. And I've decided over the years that I find this more interesting than annoying. The question is, who is Rey? The Force Awakens sets it up as a mystery, and then to its credit, mostly leaves it alone. She's a scavenger on Jakku. She's waiting for a family who left. She scratches the days onto a wall. Whether they're coming back is the question the film is actually about, and it doesn't need an answer to work. The Last Jedi answers it, and does so in about the most deflating way available. Kylo tells her, in the middle of the throne room, that her parents were nobody, junk traders who sold her for drinking money and are lying in a pauper's grave in the Jakku desert. He tells her she has no place in this story, that she comes from nothing, that she's nothing. And then he adds the part that does the damage, which is, but not to me. That's the sales pitch. He's not being cruel for the sake of it. He's making an offer. You're nobody. Everybody who was supposed to want you didn't. And I'm the only person in the galaxy who's looking at you anyway. It's a horrible thing to say, and it's also, in a bleak way, the kindest thing anyone says to her in that film. What's clever is the way it's delivered. He doesn't announce it as a revelation. He gets her to say it. He tells her she already knows the answer, that she's always known, that she just doesn't want to say it. And she does say it, crying because she does know, because part of her has believed it since she was 5. Then the Rise of Skywalker turns up and says, actually, Palpatine. Her father was a son of Palpatine, made rather than born, a man who wanted nothing to do with any of it. Her parents hid her on Jakku, not because they didn't want her, but because it was the one place nobody would look, and they were killed for refusing to say where she was. Now the internet decided this made Kylo a liar, and I don't think that's quite right, which is why I've put it in this video rather than assumed it. Everything he says about her parents is materially true. They were junk traders. They did sell her, in the technical sense that money changed hands and they flew away. They are dead in the Jakku desert. What he gets wrong, or gets to leave out, is the reason. And the reason is the entire meaning of the event. So it's not a false statement. It's a true statement with the load-bearing part removed, which by this point in the video, you'll recognise as the house style of this entire galaxy. Whether he knew the fuller version, I genuinely don't know. I lean towards him not knowing, because it makes him sadder, and because he seems to want it to be true. If Rey came from nothing, then bloodline doesn't matter, and if bloodline doesn't matter, then he isn't obliged to be a Skywalker. Half of what he does in these films is an attempt to escape a surname, which is the other lie in this trilogy, and it's the one told upward. Snoke. Enormous scarred gold dressing gown, sitting on a throne and running the First Order. He is presented as the top of the pyramid across 2 films, and there was an entire cottage industry of theories about who he was, where he came from, and what he'd been doing during the original trilogy. And the answer is that he was never at the top of anything. He was made, grown essentially, as a mouthpiece and a middle manager, by the man who'd been out at Exegol the whole time. There's a shot of spare Snokes floating in tanks, which is the sort of image that either delights you or makes you put your head in your hands. And I confess I'm in the first camp. So Kylo kills his master in a dramatic act of liberation, and what he's actually done is remove a puppet from a stage without noticing there was a hand in it. He thinks he's ended a lineage, he's cleared a middle layer. That whole reveal arrives attached to what is, without much competition, the most mocked line in the saga. Somehow, Palpatine returned. 9 words, delivered as an aside quite early by a man in a hurry. And it has been a punchline ever since, used online any time a story skips a step it should have shown you. I'll be fair to it, there is a version of that line that works. The characters are receiving a galaxy-wide broadcast from a dead man, and they have hours, not weeks. Somehow is exactly what a soldier would say, because nobody in that room knows the mechanism, and it doesn't change what they have to do about it. But the reason it stuck isn't really about the line. It's that the film knew the audience would ask how, and answered with a shrug, in dialogue, in passing, about the single biggest development in the story. The word somehow is the film admitting it doesn't want to have this conversation. The ending, though, I like a lot. She goes to Tatooine, buries 2 lightsabers, and an old woman asks her who she is, and she says Rey. And the woman asks Rey who, and there's a pause. Rey Skywalker, which is not true, in the sense that a records office would recognise. She has no blood claim to that name at all. She's picking it, out loud, in front of someone who can't verify it, at the exact spot where a completely different family used to farm moisture. And I think that's the right note to end a saga about lying on, because it's the one time somebody says something untrue, and the film is entirely on their side. A name isn't a fact you inherit. It's a claim you make about what you intend to be. That's the same mechanism as every other lie in this video, pointed somewhere decent for once. Before we leave the sequels, there's one more that I like precisely because it's so small and so obvious once you see it. Kylo's mask isn't armor. It doesn't protect anything. He isn't scarred underneath it. He isn't dying inside it. He doesn't need it to breathe. He is a fit young man in a helmet. And the helmet exists to make his voice sound like his grandfather's and to stop anybody seeing that he's about 29 and visibly upset most of the time. It's a costume. It's a young man in a mask pretending to be an older, more frightening man in a mask. And the film knows it. Snoke calls it out directly, tells him to take the thing off, mocks him for the whole performance, and Kylo goes into a corridor and smashes it, which is the least composed thing anyone does in that trilogy, and, honestly, quite relatable. Then in the 3rd film, he has it welded back together, with red seams running through it, which is either the coolest or the most adolescent design choice in Star Wars, and I've never been able to decide which. Probably both. That's rather the point of him. I bring it up because it's the cheapest lie in the whole video, and it's aimed at exactly one person. Everyone around him already knows what he is. His mother knows, his uncle knows, his master knows. The mask is for him. It's a young man trying to convince himself he's already become the thing he's decided to be by putting on something that makes his voice deeper. One last thing, and it's about the people making these films rather than the ones in them. Modern blockbusters lie professionally, at industrial scale. Fake script pages, scenes shot 2 ways, actors kept off certain call sheets, code names for characters, cast members who genuinely do not know how their own film ends until they see it. And that habit goes right back to the twist we talked about earlier. When Empire was shot, almost nobody on that production knew what Vader was going to say on the gantry. The shooting script had him claiming Obi-Wan killed Luke's father, and that's the line that was performed on set by an actor who had no idea he was saying a placeholder The real line went in later, in a booth, with a very small number of people in on it, which means the biggest reveal in film history was protected by lying to the crew, and it worked so completely that the moment landed clean in cinemas in 1980. It's the one category of lie in this entire video that I'd call a public service. So that's where I've got to, and I'm aware it isn't finished, because it can't be. There's a whole list of things I didn't get to. Boba Fett's contracts, and the number of times he's been paid to deliver someone he had no intention of delivering. Thrawn, who barely lies at all and somehow manages to be more unsettling for it. Bail Organa quietly running an entire resistance out of a Senate office, while filing perfectly ordinary paperwork. The droids, who are constantly, cheerfully economical with the truth and never get told off for it, because nobody thinks to ask a droid whether it's being honest. And Galen Erso, who I feel a bit guilty about leaving out, because his is arguably the longest single lie in the whole franchise. Years of appearing to build a weapon for people he despised, in order to hide one small, deliberate flaw in it, knowing that nobody would ever know he'd done it unless a very specific set of things went right long after he was dead. There's another video in that lot somewhere. I'll get round to it. What I keep coming back to, though, is how ordinary most of it is. The lies in this saga aren't clever mostly. Even the biggest one, the story that turned an entire religious order into a superstition inside a generation, was really only a man standing at a podium and saying something confidently while everyone was frightened. And the ones behind the camera are the same. A number that got smaller each time it was mentioned. A twist that was always planned retroactively. A cantina scene that keeps getting adjusted by a man who'd rather his cowboy behaved like a cowboy. None of it is criminal mastermind stuff. It's people doing the thing people do, which is deciding what somebody else gets to know, and then living inside that decision until it hardens into the truth. I think that's why the saga holds up, personally. Not the ships, not the swords, lovely as they are. It's that under all the space wizardry, it's a very long story about families and institutions keeping things from each other, and the specific, slow damage that does. Anyway, it's late and I've been talking for a couple of hours about a fictional galaxy, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. If you're still awake, which I'd be mildly impressed by, there'll be another one of these along soon. If you're not, that's rather the point, and none of this will be going anywhere. Sleep well. Oh, one last thing, and then I'll stop. The thing I find genuinely warm about all of this is that the saga never punishes you for having believed the wrong version. Luke believed his father was murdered for 2 films, and it didn't make him a fool. It made him a person who'd been told something by someone he trusted. That's most of us most of the time, about most things. Right,